Officials at the State Department and the Pentagon say Russia's military, not separatists, Russia's military is attacking Ukrainian military targets. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. For quite some time, it's been clear that Russia was aiding the separatists fighting Ukraine's government. An intelligence official recently told Fox that though there was no smoking gun, Russia created the conditions that led to the shootdown of Flight 17. But today we learned of a clear escalation. Russia is directly firing at Ukrainian forces. Correspondent Steve Harrigan is on the ground in Ukraine with the very latest. Hi, Steve.
Brett, today an assertion from the U.S. State Department that the Russian military is not just aiding the rebels in eastern Ukraine, but doing much more. According to the State Department, the Russian military is attacking Ukrainian government forces from Russian territory.
We have new evidence that the Russians intend to deliver heavier and more powerful multiple rocket launchers to the separatist forces in Ukraine, and have evidence that Russia is firing artillery from within Russia to attack Ukrainian military positions.
Such direct action would be a considerable escalation from simply supporting rebel fighters with ammunition and training. It comes at a time when Ukrainian forces are gaining ground, but with a shaky political situation in Kiev. In the middle of an armed rebellion, a financial crisis, and an aviation disaster, Ukraine's prime minister resigned. The sudden move by pro-Western Arseniy Yatsenyuk comes at a time of concern about the government's ability to meet its financial obligations. How are we going to pay for the fuel for armored vehicles, he told Parliament today. How will we pay those families who've lost soldiers? The collapse of the governing coalition came after 2 days of fistfights between lawmakers and Parliament, with some accusing the Communist Party of aiding the Russian-backed rebels. Meantime, the violence is impeding progress in the investigation of the downing of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 in pro-Russian rebel-held territory in eastern Ukraine. At this major section of the plane crash site, you can tell there's no sense of security, no investigation going on here either. And if you take a closer look at this section of the plane, it looks like someone took a power saw to make these jagged edges, perhaps cutting away what could be important evidence. 74 more bodies were transported to the Netherlands from eastern Ukraine today. Identification of the bodies is expected to take anywhere from days to weeks. The Russian-backed rebels have been steadily losing ground, but direct intervention from the Russian military could shift the balance and escalate the war. Brett?
Steve Harrigan live in Donetsk early Friday morning. Steve, thank you. For more on what today's news means of this escalation, let's turn to national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin here in the Bureau. Jennifer, is this the first time Russia's fired on the Ukrainians?
Well, in fact, U.S. intelligence and the Pentagon have been watching this develop for weeks. We have video from July 16th of Russia firing the Grad multi-rocket launcher over the border from Russia. We can't confirm the authenticity, but it is fired in Rostov. That's the same region where Russian troops are. Then there is this photo posted today on Twitter showing the aftermath of a Russian artillery strike today on the Ukraine border. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia fired at 8 Ukrainian positions in the past 3 days alone. Just yesterday, less than a week after the downing of the Malaysian plane, 2 Ukrainian Su-25 fighter jets were shot down. At least one of them, Ukrainians believe, was brought down by missiles fired from the Russian side of the border. And the day before, the Malaysian plane was shot down, Brett, by a Russian SA-11 missile launcher. A Russian MiG reportedly fired from Russian airspace at another Ukrainian Sukhoi jet, bringing that plane down. This has been going on for some time. Remember, there are still 10 to 12,000 Russian troops on the border. They are dug in. They have camouflaged positions. It's just the magnitude of the weapons being used that has increased since April 22nd, when the first Ukrainian plane was fired on by Russian weapons. The Pentagon started getting particularly worried about this around June 29th when they saw this heavy buildup on the border. Today, as the State Department pointed out, it was artillery fire, 122 millimeter batteries, and multiple rocket launchers, Grad rockets, that hit the checkpoint near the border.
What about this? I mean, the timing of state talking about it from the podium. Why now? If they've had all of this, why talk about it and Marie Harf come out and say what she said?
Well, I think you have to look at it in terms of what else happened today, and that is that the Canadians and the EU for the first time ratcheted up sanctions on Russia. The EU targeted 15 individuals, 18 companies that are supporting the Russian government, and they described the reason for those sanctions as Ukraine's territorial integrity is being threatened. So this provides some evidence of that. Canada, on the other hand, it focused on Gazprom Bank. That's significant because Gazprom, as you know, is in the energy sector. Does this mean that finally the Canadians and others are going to target these Russian banks and the energy sector?
So shore them up, basically. More on this with the panel. Thank you, Jennifer. The death toll in the Israeli-Hamas conflict continues to climb as it enters its 18th day. Even designated safe areas are becoming increasingly dangerous for civilians. Correspondent Connor Powell is in Gaza City early Friday morning.
The shelling of Bet Hanun can be seen from a distance. The northeastern neighborhood in Gaza has been the site of growing fighting between Israeli soldiers and Hamas fighters. Thousands of Palestinians have followed Israeli advice to leave their homes, hoping to avoid being caught in the middle of the violence, many taking refuge in United Nations-run shelters similar to this one. Hamas operates in the area. Their flags are visible. As the fighting crept closer to civilian shelters, the UN says it tried to coordinate a safe passage with Israel for civilians to flee. It was never granted.
Just a few minutes ago, a UN school just like this full of kids and refugees was hit by shelling. Everybody here is saying that they are angry. There's nowhere safe. They want the international community to help.
Israel says its troops were battling militants, but there are no reports of fighters inside the building that was hit. Still, Israeli shells destroyed the shelter. At least 16 people, including 3 UN teachers, were killed. The local hospital overwhelmed with dozens of injured women and children. The Israeli military says they're investigating the incident, but blamed Hamas for using innocents as human shields. This comes as at least 2 Israelis were injured by Hamas rockets today. Civilian casualties on both sides is a major concern for diplomats.
We again urge all parties to redouble their efforts to protect civilians.
Secretary of State John Kerry remains in the region, but so far a ceasefire, even a temporary humanitarian one, remains elusive. Hamas is demanding an end to the 8-year-long Israeli blockade of Gaza, while Israel wants Hamas rockets to end and its tunnels destroyed. Neither side trusts the other, and neither seems willing to give up. Despite the continued violence, the FAA lifted its 48-hour travel ban for American flights to Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport, which had been in place after rockets hit a town near the runway. The removal of the ban was welcomed by Israel, but Hamas vows to continue aiming its rockets at the airport.
Tonight we saw the largest Palestinian protest in the West Bank since the start of the Second Intifada 14 years ago, a sign of just how angry the Palestinian street is at the violence happening here in Gaza, Brett.
Okay, Connor Powell, live in Gaza City. Connor, thank you. President Obama is not the only world leader who is dealing with an optics problem these days. Here's Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen on UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and his relationship to Qatar.
With Secretary of State Kerry shuttling around the Mideast to broker a ceasefire in Gaza, aides said he spoke 3 times by phone with the foreign minister of Turkey, the country whose prime minister has accused Israel of committing genocide in the conflict, and twice with the foreign minister of Qatar, the country whose oil wealth is believed to be bankrolling not only vital infrastructure projects in Gaza, but also the rocket launchers and tunneling equipment that Hamas has used to attack Israel.
Qatar doesn't have the right to send the money of the oil to build rockets and tunnels and support the killing of people, with all due respect to Qatar.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who arrived in Jerusalem on the same day as Kerry, faced criticism about how he got there.
Mr. Secretary General, do you think it's appropriate for Qatar to be paying for your flight here, given their support for Hamas?
Ban said he didn't have time to waste, and his aides rejected any conflict of interest.
There's a number of different parties he's been meeting with, and he deals with them equally and even-handedly trying to get at a ceasefire.
The State Department's latest terrorism report said Qatari-based terrorist fundraisers, whether acting as individuals or as representatives of other groups, were a significant terrorist financing risk and may have supported terrorist groups in other countries.
I hope that Secretary Kerry is telling the Qataris they've got to get with the program and join the other Arabs in the Gulf, Egypt, Jordan, in being against Hamas and pushing for a quick ceasefire without all of Hamas's war aims being met.
Other countries in the region who can push Hamas to accept a ceasefire. Qatar's obviously one of them. It's important to get to a ceasefire, so we will continue working with them.
The Qatari embassy in Washington did not respond to requests for comment, but the head of Hamas spoke out forcefully from his base in Doha, Qatar.
When it comes to this balance of power in this battle between us and Israel, they are the executioners, the aggressors, the occupiers.
As for Turkey, Prime Minister Recep Erdogan doubled down on his comments about Israel and genocide, telling CNN International today, and I quote, "You can see that what Israel does to Palestine, to Gaza right now, has surpassed what Hitler did to them," unquote. Marie Harf said that Secretary Kerry has been protesting Erdogan's remarks in his talks with Turkey's foreign minister. Brett.
More on all this with the panel. James, thank you. Up next, world crises deepen. President Obama is still fundraising. Ed Henry has that. First, what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. WTXF in Philadelphia is covering a shooting in the psychiatric ward of a hospital this afternoon. One employee at Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital died. 2 people were hurt, including the gunman. Fox 43 in Norfolk, Virginia has extreme weather in the area. 2 people died, at least 20 others were hurt when a fierce storm tore through a campground. One camper described it as, quote, all hell breaking loose. And this is a live look at Detroit from our Fox affiliate there, WJBK. The big story there tonight is the special delivery Canada is bringing south, if it can get past the border guards. 8 cars packed with hundreds of gallons of Canadian tap water are on their way to Detroiters. The bankrupt city turned off water to residents who didn't pay their bills. The shutoffs were put on a 15-day hold Monday. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.